Hey, hi everybody. Thank you for coming. If you don't know me, I think I recognize all of you, but my name is Shay. I am, for now, the Seniors Program Supervisor at Robson Valley Community Services and part of the Elder Care Collaborative, who is hosting this event for you. So the Elder Care Collaborative is a group of individuals who represent, work for, and alongside seniors in the community. It includes health professionals, nonprofit organizations, and just people interested in what's happening for seniors in the community. So we received funding from the Ministry of Health's Age-Friendly Grant. And if you were part of the Seniors Fair last fall, that was one of the events that we had hosted. This is another one of them. So the intention today, and for the next 2 sessions, is to give you a bit of information about housing supports for seniors. So today we're going to have Corey Marshall and Jen Applebaum share a little bit about the Valemount Affordable Rental Society, and Jen is with Rustic Luxury, and she's a property manager in the community. She's going to tell us a little bit about BC tenancy laws. And then there's a poster at this front table, if you'd like to grab one when you leave. It tells you about what the next 2 sessions are. So we have today, and then on May 4th and May 11th, they're essentially the same event, just at 2 different locations if you have a preference, or if you're only available for one. And Rashmi, myself, Jamie, and perhaps a few others will be there to assist you and tell you about grants and subsidies available to homeowners. So such as, Jen I think goes into it a little bit maybe, it's called the SAFER grant. We have grants available to assist folks with disabilities, better at home supports. If you're curious or if you know somebody who could benefit from these kind of supports, come learn about them, and then we can help you actually fill out the applications too. So that's May 4th and May 11th. If you grab a poster on your way out, we'll have more information there. I think that's all for now. I wanted to say there's coffee, tea, and snacks over there. Help yourself. I believe the Great Room provided us with the snacks, which is really kind of them. So we'll start with Corey, representing the Valemount Affordable Rental Society.
Should I use the mic? Hi. My presentation's not very long. But I just want to let you know, I'm Corey Marshall. I was on the VARS board, the Valemount Affordable Rental Society board, since we started in 2017. I stepped off the board last summer to become the Society's first paid staff member. So I'm now part-time administrator for the Society, and we currently operate 22 units. Our first project was a 3-bedroom house and 8 units in the renovated hotel. Most people remember it as the old Ramikata. Those units are all unsubsidized. We aim to keep them affordable for local people who work in town. So for example, our bachelor units in Juniper Square 1 includes furnishings, heat, and Wi-Fi, and we're currently renting them for $775 a month. So if you make something like $600 a week in income, that would be considered affordable since you're paying less than 30% of your income towards rent. We have a long-term mortgage and an operating agreement with BC Housing, and we receive generous funding from the Columbia Basin Trust for that project as well. Our second project is Juniper Square 2, so that's another 13 units, and it's a mix of income levels. So the entire project is subsidized, but not all units are. So under BC Housing's Community Housing Fund, we have a mix of rent geared to income, which would mean you would pay approximately 30% of your income towards your rent. We have market units, and then we have deep subsidy units, which essentially means you are on income assistance of some sort, and you would pay a shelter rate that is determined by the government, which unfortunately sometimes that can actually be more than 30% of your assistance. Market in this case means we would income test you at first when you move into the building to ensure you're under a fairly high level of income. And then after that, it's a regular tenancy. So you would basically pay what we consider a market rent for the Valemount area, and that is pre-pipeline. So Juniper Square 2, I often just call it JS2. JS2 has 8 2-bedroom units on the second floor with private stairways. We have a single 3-bedroom unit and 4 1-bedroom units on the main floor. So all have private entrances and include washer and dryer. We are required to follow the national occupancy standards when placing tenants, so most seniors would only qualify for a 1-bedroom unit. We completed the building in October of 2021, and we have had no turnover yet in the one-bedroom units since we've placed them. So we do have a wait list. Currently about a dozen local people have contacted me who might qualify for the one-bedroom units, but of course I have no way of knowing when a vacancy might come up, and people's situations change, so I always suggest if people are interested that they put an application in through the housing registry. One of the benefits of the housing registry is that if there are other BC Housing funded buildings that you might be interested in, you can apply just once, and you can note your location or your city or your specific building interests. So for example, if you might be interested in the new project that the Seniors Society is working on, that's also funded under the Community Housing Fund, and part of that fund agreement requires us to use the housing registry. Some people do choose to complete a paper application, which is actually a little bit simpler because if you fill out the application online, you still have to print and sign and mail in a declaration. And if you don't do that, your application will expire in a month. So some people find it a lot easier just to print off a paper application and bring it to us. And you can drop that, you can deliver it either to me or you can drop it off at the Learning Center. But I would only suggest doing that if you're only interested in our building. When we do have a vacancy in a subsidized unit, I will have a meeting with our selection committee, which is made up of some of our board members, and we'll look at the list of applications, both in the housing registry and the paper applications that we'd received directly. And we have a few criteria we look at, such as where you are currently living, that if you're currently living locally, what your current housing situation is, how long you've had your application with us, if you've rented from us before, and then would contact the person or the family that scores highest on that matrix. And then I also need to go through and collect financial information to determine that the applicant is eligible and to determine what their rent would be. And if they agree to that amount, I would get Jen, who is also our property manager, to meet with them and to do a unit inspection, sign rental agreement, all that sort of things. If you are in a subsidized unit, we do have to review your income annually. So collecting income tax returns, proof of benefits, other income, all that sort of stuff, at least once a year. And for our building, we do that in the summer. And I did just want to give an example. So BC Housing has this really nice long manual for how to calculate rent. It's not very straightforward. Generally, it means that 30% of your income, but there's a lot of details that we need to look at. But I did want to just give you a simple example. So for example, a single senior, guaranteed income, including the OAS, the GIS, and the senior supplement, should be $1,822 a month. So if that's your only income, we would look at the economic rent for one of our one-bedroom units. So the cost to operate that unit is $1,088. 30% of your income, if you're that senior with just the OAS, GIS, and senior supplement, 30% of that would be $547. We subtract a heat allowance because you'd be paying for your own heat. So BC Housing has set a certain amount for a one-bedroom unit, which happens to be $37. So you subtract $37 from the $547, and your rent contribution would be $510. And basically what happens is that tenant and our society both apply to BC Housing for the subsidy of the $578 that brings up for the actual cost of operating that building. So that's just a really simple and fairly common calculation, but there's a lot of other details that can make it complicated and really hard to explain it quickly. I do have some paper applications, which I'll leave here if anybody wants to grab those. And I don't know if there's anything anybody has questions of me right now, I can try to answer. Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
Do Do you have any upcoming buildings and projects? I think you mentioned those words.
Yeah, we are working on another project. As I mentioned, most of our wait list is single people, not all seniors. So we are working on another project, hopefully up to 12 single units. There isn't any funding that I know of yet for that stream, so we're looking at, looking at some private investment, really just looking at what we can try to do there. But yeah, so we are looking at what more we can build, but obviously building is not getting cheaper.
Thank you.
Yep.
Can I just reiterate, if folks that are interested in applying get the application from the housing registry?
Yes, yep, that's right.
Thank you. And I just want to jump in, if anybody needs help accessing that, folks like Jamie, myself, or Ashmi are happy to help you find those applications.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thanks very much.
So I'm also part of the Elder Collaborative, and one of the reasons we decided to have Jen Applebaum come and educate seniors was she found that one of her clients had come and got evicted. One of her senior clients had come and got evicted and didn't know their rights and their rights. And so when we had a chance to apply to the age-friendly grant, this was one of the things that we felt would be useful for seniors to know what are their rights, and also, there are different grants for seniors, and we wanted to help them access the grants, which we're going to do in the next 2 sessions. So that was the reason we felt that this might be useful for seniors, and yeah, thanks. Go ahead, Jen.
Fortunately, mine is longer than 10 minutes. So just to introduce myself first, my name is Jen Applebaum. I'm the owner of Rustic Luxury Home Services, which is a licensed brokerage providing property management services for this area, or however far I can drive and provide service. McBride is a bit too far to actually provide good service, so really because we're so isolated, I'm in Valemount, Tejon area, in the rural area. For those of you that don't know me, I moved to Valemount in 2001, and I worked as the mental health counselor for Robson Valley Home Support Services Society back then for 4 years. So I was doing, my background is in mental health, and that's what I did for the first 4 years in the Valley. From there, I got my property management license and worked through Valemount Real Estate, which is where Jeanette Townsend was the managing broker for quite a while. So I did property management services through Valemount Real Estate until 2013, when my business, Rustic Luxury, became licensed as a brokerage. So then I could operate as a sole proprietor. And since then, I'm the only licensed property manager in the area. It's a small community, and I do my best to manage both the tenant's needs and the owner's needs. And so it's a bit of a balancing act, but the British Columbia Tenancy Act has very specific rules that everyone has to follow. So that helps me do my job, and it helps me protect both the tenants and the real estate investors to be protected on both sides. So that's my role as a property manager. There's a lot of private real estate owners that don't use a property manager, and they do that role themselves. So the people that hire me don't want to be hands-on landlords. So I become their agent, their legal agent. I would show a property, fill in contracts, collect rent, and be the contact person. That's the role of a property manager. So what I've done, at the front there's a sheet, a one-page sheet for those of you that are computer literate. Not a lot of us are. There's a lot of information, well, all the information now is online. That's the easiest way to get forms and look up legislation and get your questions answered. So I've created a quick list that I can email to anyone, so you can just click on the link. So there's actually a sign-up form at the front. If you want to leave me your email address, I can email you this form. Then it's a digital copy and you can just click on it on your computer. Otherwise, this is basically it's a quick contact list. So we've got the phone number and the web address for the BC Residential Tenancy Branch, which is the arbitrator and the kind of the legal entity to deal with tenancy issues in BC. We've got links to all the tenancy legislation. Not the easiest read or not the funnest read, but it's got all the information you need. We've got links to the privacy information and what do we have here? BC laws, documents, tenant guide, and some links to financial information. So it was mentioned quickly before, there are a few programs that tenants can access to help with rent costs if you qualify. So there's the rental assistance program called RAP, and the shelter aid for elder renters, which is SAFER. There's also BC Hydro Customer Crisis Fund. So BC Hydro, if you're having difficulty covering your hydro costs, they have a fund to help with that in certain situations. And BC Hydro also has a conservation assistance program where they can assist with replacing items to help you lower your costs through them. So things like LED light bulbs, high efficiency shower heads. I guess we're not monitored for water here, but faucet aerators, door weather stripping, insulation wrap for hot water pipes. There's a list here of things that BC Hydro, if you qualify, can offer to help you reduce some of your housing costs. So that's up front. Okay, now we'll actually start. And please stop me at any time if you have questions on a particular slide or a topic, or you can ask me at the end, that's fine. So these are the topics that we're going to be covering. So we'll be looking at basically the process of being a renter in British Columbia. Each province has different rules. So we're in BC. Starting new tenancy, the tenancy agreement, security and pet damage deposits, inspections, paying your rent, landlord access to your property. I get a lot of questions about that. Quiet enjoyment and what that means, and safety issues. Repairs and maintenance of a property that you're renting, don't own. So the tenant and the landlord has different responsibilities for that. Solving problems and ending the tenancy. So starting a new tenancy. What you want to do is you always want to physically, or have someone in your place physically, step inside the space that you're going to pay money for. It's been a bit hectic here with the pipeline where people have frantically wanted to find housing and have paid a deposit in their first month's rent, and it's a scam. The place doesn't exist, it's something on MLS, people have lost money. We have homeowners with people showing up saying they've rented their place, and they haven't rented their place, the homeowner lives there. So before you enter into any business agreement, you're going to want to know what you're agreeing to. So one of that is to physically to view the space. You're also going to want to meet or speak with the landlord directly. So this is the person who is legally authorized to collect the rent payments or to respond to any future problems and to make decisions. So not the neighbor who's got the key to let you in to see it, and not the friend from California that's taking care of their friend's place. You want to actually meet the person who you're going to be doing business with. If there's a rental application, and most places have a rental application, you're going to want to provide the appropriate information. Some landlords ask for inappropriate information. So what they can ask for is proof of your identity, proof of income, references from previous or current landlords, and your current employer. So that's to be able to confirm that you exist as a legal person, that you can pay the rent, and how you are maintaining a property in the past. Those are fair and legal questions for a landlord to ask. What they can't ask for is your credit card, they can't ask for your bank information, they can't ask for your social insurance number, and they can't ask for those things and then keep it on file if they need it. That's confidential. So if anyone asks you for that, they're not someone you want to do business with. You'll have to confirm if you have pets, and if pets are permitted in the rental, and you have to understand and agree to any rules regarding the pets in the tenancy. You're not to provide payment until you have been offered a contract to review and sign, and both the tenant and the landlord have signed copies of all documents. So you want, in exchange for your money, you're going to get a contract. You want that to happen at the same time. And you also want to make sure that you have proof of that payment, however that is. If it was a bank transfer or an e-transfer, that will be noted in your bank statement. If you're paying cash, you always get a receipt. Okay, tenancy agreements. I did bring a copy. You can't really see, but on the side is a picture of the standard tenancy contract, which is available through the residential tenancy branch online. I use this. Some landlords create their own. It's a lot of work and you don't need to do that. The government has approved this tenancy agreement. It has all the standard terms. No one has to make any decisions about what needs to be going in there and what doesn't. So this is what I use. It's printable, it's fillable right on the website. And I can leave a copy of the front. You can have a look. Okay. So all new residential tenancy agreements, tenancies are require an agreement in writing. And changes can only be made by mutual consent and should be documented in writing. So you're entering into a contract, you want to all agree on the same things. Both landlords and tenants must sign and date the agreement. The landlords need to provide a printed copy to their tenants within 21 days of entering into the agreement, but I would recommend that you don't provide payment until you get your copy of the tenancy contract. If there's a reason, I'd want to ask why a landlord needs 3 weeks to get you a copy of something that you pay for. All tenancy agreements must include the standard terms that protect landlords and tenants and ensure the tenancy agreements are fair and balanced. These terms even apply when there is no written tenancy agreement. So a tenant is protected under BC tenancy laws, whether you have something in writing or not. Your standard protections are in place. Examples of standard terms include the provincial rules for rent rate increases, landlord access, repairs, and subletting. So some tenancy terms are negotiated between the tenant and the landlord. So outside of the contract, there can also be rules for the building or the property that you're renting. So the terms that are negotiated would be who the agreement is between. So you fill that in, the legal names of the landlord and the tenant. So if you're renting from a numbered company, that question has come up, you actually want to know the name and phone number, email address of a human. So the property may be owned by a numbered company, but you actually want a contact person. So you want to write that in to the tenancy contract. People that aren't named in the agreement might not have any tenant rights. So if you have a roommate, if you have a family member, if there's a husband and wife and only the wife's name is on the tenancy contract, the husband is not a legal tenant. So if there's a split, the wife can ask the husband to leave and they're not a tenant on a contract. So it's really important that you name everyone that you want to be considered a legal tenant. You negotiate the length, the initial length of the tenancy, whether that's going to be a month to month, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. That's called the tenancy term. You're going to negotiate your rent. So how much the rent is, when it's due, how it can be paid. And the contract needs to identify what's included in your rent. So some contracts include utilities, so propane, fuel, BC Hydro, heating costs. Most tenancies do automatically, the owners of the property pay municipal utilities. So water, sewer, garbage is part of the property owner's responsibility. Some rent includes laundry, internet, satellite TV service, and the contract will also need to disclose what is a refundable or a non-refundable fee, such as late fees or the cost for renting a garage clicker or something like that. A landlord can request a deposit for those kind of things. Essential services such as heat, electricity, and hot water must be provided with the rental space, but the agreement says who pays for that. So a garage is not considered a residential space to rent. It needs to have basic services. And deposits. So the agreement will indicate what deposits are required and when they're due. Only one security deposit and one pet deposit can be requested per unit, and each of those cannot be more than half of 1 month's rent. So a landlord cannot request more than 1 full month's rent in deposits in total, and only half of that if you don't have an animal. Manufactured home park landlords cannot ask for deposits. And then the contract will indicate if about pets, so whether there's pet restrictions or whether they're allowed. Okay, so your security and your damage deposits. At the start of a tenancy, a landlord can require a security deposit or a damage deposit. They mean the same thing, interchangeable terms. It can be no more than half of the first month's rent. So if your rent increases over time, you don't pay more deposit. You only pay half of the original rent amount. A landlord may also request a pet damage deposit at the start of a tenancy or during a tenancy if a tenant gets a pet with the landlord's permission. The pet deposit must be no more than half of 1 month's rent, regardless of the number of pets that have been allowed. You cannot use your damage deposit holdings towards unpaid rent unless the landlord has given permission in writing, and the deposit is held for move-out damages only. So since 2009, with interest rates having been as low as they were, there was 0 interest earned or payable on damage deposits. Interest earned on damage deposits was reinstated this year at 1.95%. So if you've had your damage deposits held for the last 10 years, there's actually a calculator on the Tenancy Branch website. You plug in when you moved in, how much damage deposit you put in, and it automatically calculates the interest that your landlord owes back to you. And that just started again, so in 2023, 1.95% will be calculated on 2013. Just the amount of deposit that was held for this year. The rest of the years would be 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. So you can calculate that yourself, so then you can check whether your landlord has done the calculations correctly. So in order to keep all or part of the deposit, the landlord must either apply for dispute resolution or get the tenant's written consent to keep all or part of the deposit. And the deposit must be returned to a tenant within 15 days of the end of the tenancy, only if the tenant has provided their forwarding address in writing. So if someone just moves out and I don't know how to find them, I can't give them their money back. So the Tenancy Act allows me after 2 years to give that money back to the owner. So it's calculated as held as a liability for 2 years while we wait for an address. Any questions?
Yes, I have you.
Yeah.
So the damage or security deposit does, because you often read 1 month of rent will be needed or so for, in case you're moving out without paying the last month's rent or something. So you cannot do that.
No, not in DC.
Okay, so this is only kind of half, but would be kind damage deposit.
Yeah.
And cannot be used for not paid rent.
Other provinces allow a landlord to collect first and last month's rent.
Okay.
So the first month is your kind of confirmation of the agreement. The last month is a protection for the landlord in case that happens. If a tenant moves out early, in BC, you're not allowed to do that. So the only way your damage deposit can be held in lieu of rent is if you have an agreement with the landlord. So if the last month money's tight, you've got to rent a moving truck and pay for a hydro deposit in a new place and hire, it's expensive to move. Sometimes if you've been an amazing tenant and your landlord's done inspections and they're not expecting any damages, they can release your half a month's damage deposit towards your rent. I've done that a few times. But it's risky because anything could happen in that last month and then you don't have, the landlord doesn't have even that half month's rent to cover costs.
Thank you.
Okay, having pets in a rental unit. I'm an animal lover. I love pets. We have lots of animals at home. But in the properties that I manage, the owners of those properties get to decide whether there's animals that are allowed in their properties. That's the rule in BC. So there are rules with regards to animals. So we'll go over some of that. So the landlord decides whether a pet is allowed at a rental property. And the tenancy contract will tell you what the rules are. You have to agree to that. Before you move in, you'll know what the rules are. So the contract can restrict the size, type, and number of pets. As well, the village may also restrict the size, type, and number of pets. So being in the village, there's also rules we have to follow with bylaw. So it can include reasonable pet-related rules. It can require a pet damage deposit. It can require proof of vaccinations, spay and neuter, and a municipal license, so dogs need a license. Tenants are responsible for cleaning up after their pets and repairing any damages they cause. Guide and service dogs are not considered pets.
Can I ask you a question?
Should we pause?
I have a question for you.
Sure.
I remember seeing something in the news about landlords no longer being able to not rent to somebody due to pets. Do you know what I'm talking about there? Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
No? Does that sound familiar to anybody? Okay, maybe not. Never mind.
Guide and service dogs are not considered pets. They're considered like a medical appliance, or so to speak. So they don't fall under the rules of a companion. An emotional support animal, what are the other terms? Just a support animal or emotional support animal. They're considered companions, they're considered pets. So a landlord can definitely decide whether or not they'll allow a pet in the unit. There's definitely a shortage of rental housing that will allow pets. That is a problem. There's a lot of animals that are being unfortunately dumped because people have to move, they can't afford or find a new place that will allow animals. That is a problem, but we can't force a property owner to agree to rules that they don't want in their building.
And this is provincial, right? Like,
Yeah.
Because I feel like I heard that in the Vancouver area, but I suppose they'd have to follow the same rules as the whole province.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you find anything about that, send it to me.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Because if you've heard it, one of my tenants has heard it too. And I need to have the answers. Okay. Okay, so I can't reiterate this enough. Tenants are responsible for their animals at all times. And some problems with pets are grounds for ending your tenancy. So if you have a dog and the dog does huge damage to the property, if there's barking, if there's threatening, jumping over fences, if your cat is let loose constantly and digging up gardens, and your landlord can end your contract because it's damaging to the property and you're no longer a good neighbor. And that can cause a problem, with their property as well. Okay, inspections. So on the side here, again, it's not very clear, that's an example of an inspection report that I use. So the landlord and the tenant must do what's called a condition inspection report together when the unit is empty before they move in and when it's empty after they've moved out. So no furniture, cleaned, this is the space I'm giving you, and we write down the condition of ceiling, walls, floor, appliances, lights, switches, everything you can think of, and we do the same thing when a tenant moves out. Oops, sorry. The difference between the move in and the move out is what your damage deposit is for. So that's the reference material for calculating a damage deposit withholding. So a tenant can assign someone to be their agent, so you can actually send someone in your place to do this. They can take pictures of everything, but someone physically should be there with the landlord. Otherwise, you have no proof of what the condition was. And the landlord must give the tenant a copy of the inspection report within 7 days, give the tenant 2 opportunities in writing to do the inspection together at reasonable times, not at midnight or show up at 4 in the morning. And the landlord must provide you with clean premises that has all appliances in good working order and at least 1 working bulb in each light fixture and all the services functional. So you need to be able to prove that the electricity works, that the toilet can flush, that the heat can turn on. That's why all services need to be functional. Any questions about inspections? Okay, paying rent. So pretty standard, tenants have to pay rent. You have to pay your rent. That's the business agreement you've entered into. You have to pay your rent in full on or before the day that it's due. If you do that, you've met 80% of your responsibility as a tenant. Rent must be paid in full and on time by the end of business on the day that it's due. If you're mailing your rent payment, you want to be sure that it's sent in time to be delivered by the due date. The landlord and the tenant agree on the amount of rent and when it's due at the start of the tenancy. So it should be very clear. You pay $600 to this bank account by the 15th of each month. That's our agreement. The tenancy agreement must be clear about what's included in the rent and if there's additional charges such as late fees or NSF fees. If you pay by check and the check bounces, the landlord can tell you in their contract, I charge $25 if you bounce a check and I have to reprocess everything. And your bank can also charge you the NSF fees. And if there's utilities included in the rent, that's also in your contract. So when you pay your rent, you know exactly what you're paying for and what you're getting in return. The rent amount the contract can also limit the number of people that live in the unit, and it can indicate if there's additional rent, if there's additional people that are moved in. But all these terms have to be reasonable. So if you don't pay your rent, the landlords we'll get to end of tenancy notices later, but if you don't pay your rent on time, a landlord can give a 10-day notice for non-payment of rent any day after rent is due. They don't have to wait 3 days or 5 days or whatever people have come up with a rule in mind. If you haven't paid rent, the landlord can make you pay rent or make you move out. So there's an official 10-day notice. If you get this notice, you have 5 days to pay your rent in full, and that cancels a notice. You have 5 days to file for arbitration, the tenancy branch. If you don't respond, it's considered that you agree, and the landlord can reasonably expect you to leave. So it can be pretty serious. A landlord can issue a notice of rent increase 3 months ahead of when they want to increase it, and they can raise the rent once in 12 months. Every 12 months, the rent can be increased. The rent increase for an existing tenancy is directed by the government. They announce how much is allowable each year. So this year was 1 point, which is, it was 1.7, 1.3. It's very small. The rent was, there was rent freeze for a few years over COVID, and their evictions were frozen. People couldn't be removed for not paying rent. So now that with interest rates going up and the cost of living going up, the tenancy branch has reinstated a small rent increase. And that is posted on the tenancy branch website as well.
Got a question for you, Jen? Yeah. What are the appropriate methods of paying rent? Like
Whatever you agree with your landlord.
Okay. Is there any that you would not suggest? I did hear you say if you pay cash, make sure you get a receipt. Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. I don't even understand Bitcoin, so don't try to pay me with Bitcoin. I wouldn't consider bartering as a good method of paying rent, but anything is agreeable. If you live in a rural property and you're going to exchange
Goats.
half a beef for 6 months of rent, whatever, that's, as long as it's in writing.
Okay.
You can enter into a contract if it becomes legal and binding if it's reasonable and it doesn't break any laws. Over COVID, I shut my office down because it's just me in my home office. It's a very small space, and the licensing board allowed property managers to receive rent by e-transfer, which is something they didn't allow previously. So they allowed digitization more, so I almost never receive cash payments anymore. It's simple for everyone. So no one really has to come in and I have to count money and write out a receipt. It's a legal way of paying rent, but most landlords don't receive cash rent. Usually check, a direct bank deposit, although that's difficult for me because I deal with a lot of people. I use a property management computer system where it can be automated, so people can put in their banking information and the system does an automatic withdrawal every month in the amount that they approve, or e-transfer. So e-transfer check or the e-payment system is what I use. Okay, what are the legal reasons you cannot pay your rent? There are 5 of them. You don't have to pay your rent if you have an arbitrator's decision allowing a deduction. So you've been through the process and the tenancy branch arbitration has told you you can deduct money. If the landlord illegally increases your rent, you don't have to pay the additional. If the landlord has overcharged for security or pet damage deposit, you can make that adjustment yourself. If the landlord refuses the tenant's written request for reimbursement of an emergency repair that they had already paid for, you can withhold that from the rent. And if the tenant has the landlord's written permission allowing a rent reduction. So those are the 5 legal reasons you cannot pay rent. Okay, landlord access. So landlords have rights to access residential rental units in some situations, but there are important restrictions to those rights. The time scheduled for entry must be between 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. unless another time is agreed upon. The landlord must provide written notice to enter the rental unit, and it must be received by the tenant at least 24 hours before entry unless the tenant agrees otherwise. So all of these rules are unless the tenant and the landlord agree otherwise. I do a lot of scheduling with tenants by text. So it's a lot of work for a landlord to type up a written notice, post it on their door. I mean, if you've got realtor showings and contractors, and if the tenant agrees, then text is an appropriate way to make that arrangement. In the legislation, it says written. It must be written. So the tenant does not need to be present for the landlord to enter if proper notice was provided. So that's not a reason to refuse access to your landlord. You can't say, well, I won't be there. Because if you work daytime hours or you're busy, you have scheduled meetings, and that's when the plumber can come, you can't say, no, you can't come home. If I've given you notice that the plumber has to be there. So to access any common areas that are shared with others, hallways, courtyards, laundry facility, no notice is required. So a landlord can enter into those common areas at any time. To access the rental unit once a month, which is excessive, but in legislation, up to once a month to inspect the condition of the property, proper notice to the tenant is required. To access the rental unit to complete repairs or maintenance, proper notice is required. To access the rental unit to show the property to prospective buyers or tenants, proper notice is required. So the purpose for entering a rental unit must be reasonable, and a landlord may enter the rental unit only if there's an emergency and the entry is necessary to protect life or property, if the tenant is at home and agrees to let the landlord in, if the tenant agreed not more than 30 days before to let the landlord enter, if the tenant has abandoned the rental unit, obviously the landlord can get in, if the tenant lives in a hotel and someone comes in to clean the room, if the landlord has an arbitrator's order or court order to enter the rental unit. Any questions about access? So when the landlord has given proper notice to enter the rental unit, the tenant must not prevent access to the landlord or the agent. This is all in the Tenancy Act. The tenant or representative of the tenant may be present at the time the rental unit is entered. The landlord cannot require that a tenant leave when the rental unit is shown. So you may need to let the landlord in, but you can stay there while they're there. You can supervise everything. It's your space, it's your stuff. When a rental unit is being shown to a prospective buyer or tenants, the landlord or the landlord's agent must be present. So if someone else is being shown the property, whoever is responsible for that has to be on site. So your landlord can't say, Mary is coming by at 6 to look at the apartment. You can say, well, you can come with Mary. Otherwise, Mary's not coming in. So you have the right to be supervised and protected in your own space. Okay, and then that leads to quiet enjoyment. So tenants have a right to peace, quiet, and privacy in their homes. It's a right that comes from the common law principle of quiet enjoyment. And that means every tenant has the right to reasonable privacy, freedom from unreasonable disturbance, exclusive possession of the rental unit, subject only to the landlord's right to enter the rental unit that was went through. You have the right to the use of common areas, hallways, yards, laundry facilities, for reasonable and lawful purposes, free from significant interference. And quiet enjoyment means you have the right to have guests, to cook foods of your choice, to play music at a reasonable level during acceptable hours, to practice your religion, and to have use of all the services and facilities described in your tenancy agreement that are maintained in good repair. So that's what quiet enjoyment is. Any questions about that concept? Some landlords don't understand it, and some tenants don't understand it. So in terms of safety in your space, the landlord must provide tenants with a 24-hour emergency contact name and phone number. So if you don't own the space, then you need to be able to contact the person that does, or the person that can make decisions about the space that you're paying rent. So if there's an emergency, you can reach out. I'm the 24-hour emergency contact. That doesn't mean I'm going to pick up the phone 24 hours a day, but you can leave a message and tell me what the problem is, and then there's 911. So if there's a life issue, a flood issue, an electrical issue, fire, 911 would be the emergency call, not necessarily your landlord. They're not going to run out and put the house, water the house down. Landlords must change the locks when a tenancy starts if the tenant requests it. So it's not an automatic thing that happens between tenants, but you can, when you move into a new place, you can say, I'd like the locks changed. Locks cannot be changed during the tenancy unless both the landlord and the tenant agree. So you can't change your own locks and not give the landlord a key and say, well, now it's my space. That's against the law. And many tenants don't understand that either.
Okay.
Okay, repairs and maintenance. So the tenant's responsibility in terms of repair and maintenance, you're responsible to keep the rental unit clean and sanitary. You're responsible for repairing any damages that you cause. You're responsible for informing the landlord in writing of needed repairs, and you want that to be able to track that you have asked for a repair. You're responsible for keeping the landlord informed of any maintenance issues, including any of the building systems, such as plumbing, electrical, structural, and any intrusion of pests or moisture. And this allows the landlord to protect the safe living environment of the tenant while protecting the property owner's investment. And then the landlord's responsibilities. The landlord's responsible to keep the rental unit in a condition of repair that complies with health, housing, and safety standards, and they're required to do emergency repairs without delay, within reason. We're in Valemount. We know that there's one electrician and one plumber, and we'll get them as soon as possible. Actually, many of the contractors are really good with prioritizing emergencies and responding quickly. So what is an emergency? It's a major leak in pipes, a major leak in the roof, damaged plumbing fixtures, problems with the main heating system during heating season, electrical system issues, and damaged or defective locks that make the unit insecure. If you only have one toilet and your toilet is plugged, that's an emergency. And if you can't reach your landlord, you can call a plumber. And you can pay the plumber and you can deduct that from your rent, if it's reasonable. If it's half an hour, that's not reasonable. If it's a few hours, you can start panicking and getting stuff done on your own. That would be considered a reasonable emergency. Any questions about repairs? Okay, solving a tenancy problem. So you've entered into a business relationship. Not every relationship is going to move smoothly. People have different opinions, different personalities. People function at different levels at different times of the day. There's going to be times when you need to solve a problem. So the first thing I suggest is to build a good business relationship from the beginning, if you can. You want to meet your obligations as a tenant. You want to be reasonable and fair. You want to keep your communication lines open, which means if you change your phone number, let us know. If you change your email address, if your mailing address, if you've moved, you want to be able to communicate with the landlord. You want to contact your landlord when a concern arises, not 2 months later when you're so frustrated you're about to, blow your lid. You want to talk about things as they come up, and when you can offer solutions. Like, this is a problem, and I think this might solve it. Get it in writing. So I suggest that you take notes when there's a problem. You keep track of dates and issues. You put your concerns in writing. So that's either email or make a written note and then keep a copy of it. Texting is an option, but it's sometimes a bit more difficult to retain as written evidence. You definitely want to get signatures on any decision or changes that have been agreed on. So 2 years down the road, it's not he said, she said thing. And if all else fails, you can access dispute resolution through the tenancy branch. So if a problem can't be resolved, formal dispute resolution might be the best solution. Both tenants and landlords have the right to apply for dispute resolution, and decisions and orders are final and binding, and participants must comply with them. Any questions about solving problems?
Probably a big part of your job, right?
I'm a problem solver, yes. As the mediator between the person that owns the building and the person that's renting the building, that's what I do. But I'm good at it. I like solving problems. Okay, so ending a tenancy. So the end of your BC tenancy life cycle. There are 3 ways to end a tenancy. The tenant can end it, the landlord can end it, or you can agree to end it together. So for tenants, you must provide a written notice to end your contract at least 1 full calendar month ahead of the intended end of tenancy. The notice must identify the tenant's name, the rental address, the date that the notice is, and the date of the end of the tenancy. And the notice cannot take effect before the end of an existing term. So if you've signed a 1-year contract, you can give notice up to, and you want to move out at the end of that contract, you can give notice the month ahead. Before rent is due, the one month ahead, or even earlier, but that's the latest. A landlord must provide written notice using an approved form to end the tenancy, which is on the tenancy branch website, and a landlord's notice cannot take effect before the end of an existing term. So if you have a 6-month contract, your landlord cannot end it early, unless you agree. Usually, the 2 people can agree to anything that's legal. Sometimes things change, and that's fine. But either side can hold the other side to the original agreement. So these are the types of notices. So the 10-day notice is when the tenant has not paid their rent in full on time. One-month notice, I usually call this for cause. So there's a reason I'm needing to end the contract. It's because the contract has been breached. There's damages, excessive damages. There's a risk to the health or safety of neighbors of the property. It's repeated late payment of rent. There are disturbances, unapproved occupants, illegal activity. There's a cause that that person is no longer safe to be in that space. So that's a 1-month notice. 2-month notices can be used when, basically for landlord use. So the person that owns the building, whether it's now or the building's been sold and the new person that's going to own the building wants to live in the building. So it's no longer going to be a rental. Or if it's a subsidized rental unit and the person no longer qualifies as a subsidized tenant, that would be a 2-month notice. If a tenant receives a 2 months notice, they also receive compensation of 1 month free rent. So that can either be cash back, or they can stay there and not pay the last month's rent. That's their compensation for moving when they don't want to move.
Yeah.
Yes?
Just the part where the tenant doesn't subsidize housing and no longer qualifies.
Mm-hmm.
So if a person's income has gone too high, they will be asked to move out, or they'll be just
According to
told
the Tenancy Act, they can be given 2 months notice that they no longer qualify for that subsidized unit.
okay. Or would they just end up paying market rent? I'm just like,
It depends what kind of agreement they're in. So Corey mentioned, at least in the VARS building in Juniper Square, there's 3 different kind of rent levels. So market rent is BC Housing and the Society has done like a comparison, a market, there's a word for that, starts at C, market comparables, and they've determined what is a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom rate. So if that person, the rent wouldn't change on that. It's set at market rent. The 2 subsidized types of rent, RGI, rent geared to income, where they pay approximately 30% of their income, and deep subsidy where they pay the housing support level. Well, if their income increased, they wouldn't be on deep subsidy, so that cancels that. If their income increases and they're no longer under 100,000 or 80,000, whatever it is, they wouldn't qualify to be in that building anymore. I'm not sure if the society has is able to choose not to evict a tenant because of that. If someone wins a lottery, if someone comes into an inheritance, I don't know if they would lose their housing, but according to the Tenancy Act, they can. I guess if there's a wait list and someone can afford something else, they wouldn't need to be in subsidized housing. Okay, 4-month notice. So a 4-month notice can be used for major construction or to demolish the rental unit, to convert the residential property into strata lots, to convert the residential property into a not-for-profit cooperative, to convert the rental unit for use by a caretaker, manager, or superintendent, or to convert the rental unit into a non-residential use. So a 4-month notice is for when it's no longer going to be a rental space. And compensation for that, again, the tenant would receive 1 month's rent. Now, there is this term called rent evictions. I'm sure you've heard of that. Started in Vancouver mostly, but it's come up this way as well. That's when a landlord wants to renovate by like putting some paint on a wall and says, you have to leave because this is a lot of work, and then they triple the rent as soon as they've painted the wall. That's considered, you know, a standard rent eviction. They're not allowed anymore, so there's rules. The process for an intensive renovation, you need to prove that that is going to be done to the tenancy board, and you need to actually get an order of possession in order to then file a 4-month notice to your tenant. So in order to get this order of possession for a renovation, you need to have the necessary permits and approvals in place. Because if it's going to be a huge renovation, you're going to need permits. You're going to knock down the wall, you're going to move the plumbing, the roof is going to come off in the middle of winter, no one can live there. So you've planned it, your contractor's lined up, you've got your permits. The space needs to be vacant for the work, and the work is required to prolong or sustain the rental unit or building, not just because you want higher rent or you want to change the carpets. And the only reasonable way to get access to the empty space for the work is to end the tenancy. So many renovations can be carried out without ending a tenancy, and just minor disruptions to the tenant. Most tenants are totally fine with moving from one room to another while you change the floor and paint, rather than losing their housing. If you've got a water leak coming through, most tenants are okay with shifting over this while the ceiling is repaired or while the roof is repaired. Because there's such a housing shortage, the government's put into to place these protections so that if a landlord wants to disrupt someone's home, they have to have really good reason for it. So if a landlord qualifies for an order of possession, they can then serve a tenant with a 4-month notice.
I'm curious if you've seen an increase in that in recent years.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's why the rules have changed.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't hear that part. When did they change?
I'm actually not sure the date that it changed. I mean, it's been many years that that's happened in Vancouver, where older buildings have been blanket, all the tenants have been given notices to end the tenancy, and then they've claimed all the owners have done is paint, put in new light fixtures, and then rent it for double the rent. So all those people lost their housing. And I guess it's a balance between a property owner has the right to earn a profit on their investment, and a tenant has the right to safe housing. And so this is, I guess, what they've come up with.
The order for possession required for renovation, or is that the 4-month?
It's a separate document, so it's a separate process. You have to actually, the landlord has to file through the tenancy branch, through an arbitrator, to get an order of possession. It's an actual different legal document.
And then the tenant has so much time to
How many
vacate?
months? How many months notice is that he's asking?
Thank you.
Once, let's say I want to apply for an order of possession. I need to do major construction on my property. It needs to be empty. I've got all of these permits and everything in place. I can go to the tenancy branch and ask for an order of possession and give them my evidence. They can review it and say, you're right, this place is going to fall down if you don't do this work. Here's your order of possession. I then serve a 4-month notice.
4 months, thank you.
Yeah. And so the tenant has 4 months. They get 1 month free, either to live there for free or if they're going to stay for the full 4 months, they get 1 month rent returned. And the work can't start until the tenancy has ended.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, I think that's all I have. Does anyone have any questions?
I do. Then, I'm just wondering more like, landlords have a choice to say no to a tenant.
Yeah.
In subsidized housing, there is also a selection process. Like, can somebody refuse tenancy if they drink, or like, I'm just wondering in the societies, do you know if there's reasons?
So legally, a landlord doesn't have to tell you why they haven't chosen you. They can just choose that they don't want you as a tenant. If you know that they've not chosen you for a specific reason, it could be against the law. Like it could be against the Human Rights Code for discrimination. So on the basis of a whole list of things that you can't discriminate against. But if someone has a bad history in the community, if they have bad references, whether they give you the references or not, if a landlord knows that they're going to be very difficult to do business with, they can choose not to do business with that person.
Even a society,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the subsidized housing is just the financial part of it. The person is still applying to be a resident and to enter into a business agreement with the society or a private landlord. So you can't force someone to rent to you. You can make yourself a great tenant so no one would ever want to say no. And I try and train people to do that. I mean, I've rented to people that are 16 and people that are 80 and everything in between. I manage 27 clients now. I collect rent from 105 people, mobile home parks, apartments, houses, everything. And you can become a great tenant so you don't have any of these problems. And I think it's pretty simple. You pay your bills, you take care of the place, and you keep good communication.
Jim, I have another question. Especially applies to like an apartment building or something. If your neighbor is causing disruption, it's not going to come happy. If the neighbor is causing disruption,
You report it to the landlord. Well, the first thing, actually in my addendums, one of the terms that I list in my addendum to the contract in multi-family properties is you live in a multi-family property, people work different shifts, they work different hours, they're expected to be reasonable. Please try and, I don't have it here so I can't remember how it's written, basically try and solve the problem yourself first as an adult human sharing space. If that doesn't work, then call me. So it's my job to solve the problem. And then I'll figure, first, some people don't know they're causing a problem. And some people are really uncomfortable saying that to someone in person directly. Some people are very challenging and some people are challenged. And so that's my job as a landlord to kind of get in between. So if it's a noise issue, then you first want to let someone know. If you didn't know, this is causing a disturbance to people.
And people can be evicted for the same reason as like you said, disruption. Like it applies to subsidized housing. It's
Absolutely.
the same. Yeah, okay.
The subsidy is just how the rent level is covered.
Okay.
So the rent is either how it's calculated and how it's covered.
Yeah.
So you either pay for it yourself 100%, or you get a portion paid from housing support, or the building gets a portion paid from a subsidy. You're still a tenant, like you're still having to occupy the space and be a good tenant in that space.
It's good to know that all those rules about notice, giving the tenant notice applies universally.
Yeah.
Because I've had an issue where like my landlord went into one place not anytime recently, but a long time ago.
I'm her landlord, so I'm very curious what I was going to say.
But yeah, I've had an issue with a landlord and I was away on, left out of town and went to one place.
But they can't do that.
I know. Yeah.
Unless they tried to give you notice and you were out of the country and you didn't get that email.
Yeah.
That's what I mean about open lines of communication.
Yeah.
One of the rules of my addendum is if you're gone for more than 10 days, you need to tell me. If there's a party there and you're in Cuba, I should know and I should help you out by maybe calling the police. If it's winter and it's -30 and I know you're not in town, or if there's an emergency and I know you're not in town, I can go in. So there has to be a reason why the landlord goes into the place. But yeah, landlords, some landlords don't know the rules or don't care, and some tenants don't know the rules or don't care.
Yeah. Is there anything right now to regulate rental prices, or is it solely up to the landlord?
On a new tenancy, a landlord can set whatever rate they want, and if
$6 grand for a three-bedroom?
if the tenant pays it, then that becomes the new market level. That's the craziness with a pipeline town.
Yes.
I don't know why anyone would pay $6,000 for a house, but I don't have $6,000 to pay for a house. If I did and I wanted that house, then I've now set the new market, right? I enter into a contract. So, yes, there's a lot of discussion on Facebook about how horrible landlords are and how greedy they are. Well, the tenants are paying it. Stop paying it. You have some say in that. You have negotiating power if you, well, I guess if everyone needs to agree to, to what's reasonable.
Jen, is there an agreed upon level of occupancy that's healthy in a community? I know that like 1 or 2% is probably something reasonable. But
Like a vacancy rate?
a vacancy rate, yeah.
I'm not sure who determines that. Resort towns maybe have a different way of looking at the numbers. Whistler, for example, people have been living in vans in Whistler for decades. I don't know how, say, if it's BC Housing or the government, like that Ministry of Housing, determines when a community is at risk. Those numbers I don't know about. Valemount has always been at or near zero vacancy. Pre-pipeline, we were almost at zero vacancy. Ups and downs, sometimes I have a few places as options for people on my website. For 3 years I've had nothing. When the pipeline project leaves, it'll free up some spaces, but I think we'll still probably be at or near zero. We're just not constructing enough. There's not enough stock.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Everybody tell them,
So we have a list where people can sign up. If you want to get a copy of the slides or if you want to get a copy of the handout because it's easier to click on those links than try to type it into your web browser, they're pretty long. So we'll be happy to do that. And also, yeah, if you think you know someone who can use this information, yeah, pass them on to me or share someone and then we'll make sure they get the information. Thank you. And again, thanks to Jen and Corey.
Sorry, just wanted to... Thank you, Jen. I just wanted to say again, the next 2 weeks, if you want to hear about some of those grants or subsidies that Jen briefly mentioned, things like you have a disability and need to make some adaptations to your home, better home support programs, things like that, come next week at the Great Room or the week after that at RBCS. The information's on the poster. Thank you for your time, Jen, and thank you all for coming.
Oh, a couple of unacknowledged members of the Elder Collaborative, Kieran and Eugene and myself.
Yes, thank you for being here and supporting. Thanks all.